I just signed a $10 million contract and came home to tell my family, but my brother pushed me down the stairs. When I woke up in the hospital, my dad said I deserved it. Days later, my whole family came to mock me while I lay there helpless. The marble steps had cracked my ribs and given me a severe concussion. Blood pooled beneath my head as I called for help. Instead of rushing to assist me, Trevor stood at the top laughing. My father, William, arrived, took one look at my broken body, and told me this was karma for thinking I was better than everyone else. The hospital room felt cold and sterile as I tried to make sense of what had happened. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, and the bandages wrapped around my skull made everything feel muffled and distant. The doctors had explained that I suffered a traumatic brain injury, along with 3 broken ribs and internal bleeding. Recovery would take months, they said, assuming I had family support during the healing process. But support was the last thing I received when my mother, Sandra, walked through those doors. She wore a designer handbag I had never seen before, and her outfit looked expensive beyond anything our family could typically afford. Behind her came my sister Jessica, sporting new jewelry that glittered under the fluorescent lights. They whispered to each other while looking at me with what I can only describe as disdain. "Look at her lying there like some victim," Jessica muttered loud enough for me to hear. She always acted like she was so much smarter than the rest of us. Sandra nodded in agreement, then did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled out my credit card from her purse and waved it casually. Well, since she owes us for all those years of supporting her dreams, I figured she wouldn't mind if we did a little shopping. My heart sank as the reality hit me. While I had been unconscious fighting for my life, they had been using my financial accounts like their personal piggy bank. Jessica laughed as she showed me her new bracelet, explaining how she had charged it to my account at a boutique downtown. The total came to $8,000, she said, but I could afford it now that I was supposedly rich. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. These were the people who should have been worried about my health, praying for my recovery, holding vigil by my bedside. Instead, they saw my accident as an opportunity to enrich themselves at my expense. When my father returned with Trevor, the situation became even more horrific. Trevor showed absolutely no remorse for what he had done. In fact, he seemed proud of it. He described in detail how satisfying it had been to watch me tumble down those stairs, how my screams had been music to his ears. William listened to this confession without showing any concern for my welfare. "Maybe this will teach you some humility," my father said coldly. "You came home bragging about money like you were showing off to peasants." The doctor chose that moment to enter with urgent news about my condition. The internal bleeding was worse than initially thought, and I needed emergency surgery within the next few hours. The procedure would cost approximately $75,000, and they needed a family member to sign the consent forms since I was still considered medically compromised. William looked at the paperwork, then handed it back to the doctor unsigned. "She can pay for her own medical bills now that she has all that contract money," he declared. "We're not responsible for her anymore." The nurses in the room exchanged shocked glances. I could see the disbelief in their eyes as they witnessed a father essentially abandoning his daughter during a medical emergency. But legally, there was nothing they could do to force him to sign those papers or provide financial support. Sandra then delivered the final blow that left me completely devastated. She explained that while I had been in the hospital, they had cleaned out my apartment and donated all my belongings to charity. My father had decided that I was no longer welcome in the family home where I had been living while saving money for my business. All my furniture, clothes, electronics, and personal items were gone. "We kept your grandmother's jewelry, though," Jessica said with a smirk. "Figured we could get some good money for those old pieces at the pawn shop downtown." Hearing about my grandmother's jewelry being sold felt like losing her all over again. Those pieces were the only connection I had left to the woman who had raised me with love and kindness. She had promised they would be mine someday, a legacy of family history and affection. Now they were being converted into cash to fund my family's shopping sprees. As they prepared to leave, William made one final announcement that shattered any remaining hope I had for reconciliation. He declared that I was officially disowned from the family. They would tell people I had died in the accident if anyone asked. As far as they were concerned, I no longer existed. The room fell silent after they left, except for the steady beeping of medical monitors. I lay there processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the span of a few days, I had gone from successful entrepreneur to abandoned patient with mounting medical bills and no family support system. The hospital social worker Helen Martinez became my lifeline during those dark hours after my family's abandonment. She had witnessed the entire confrontation from the hallway and was deeply troubled by what she had observed. Helen had worked in healthcare for over 20 years, but she told me later that she had rarely seen such blatant family cruelty toward a patient. "What they did to you isn't just morally wrong," Helen explained as she sat beside my hospital bed. "There are legal protections against financial abuse, especially when it involves exploiting someone's incapacitation." She arranged for me to meet with Marcus Thompson, an attorney who specialized in financial crimes and family law. Marcus was a tall man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put me at ease. When Helen explained my situation, he offered to review my case without requiring upfront payment. The investigation Marcus conducted revealed a level of systematic theft that shocked even his experienced perspective. Bank records showed that my family had been siphoning money from my accounts for the past 6 months, not just the few days since my accident. Jessica had been making unauthorized withdrawals totaling over $50,000, claiming she needed emergency funds for various fabricated crises. "Your sister has quite the creative imagination," Marcus said as he showed me the withdrawal receipts. "She told your bank that you were traveling overseas and had authorized her to access your account for family emergencies. She provided them with a fake power of attorney document that looked surprisingly authentic. But Jessica's theft was just the beginning. Sandra had been even more systematic in her approach. She had contacted my bank claiming to be me using personal information that only a family member would know. During these phone calls, she had successfully transferred nearly $75,000 from my savings account into her own checking account. The bank had failed to verify these requests properly, accepting Sandra's knowledge of my social security number and mother's maiden name as sufficient identification. Marcus explained that this represented a serious security breach on the bank's part, and they could be held liable for allowing unauthorized access to my funds. Trevor's crimes were perhaps the most extensive of all. Using my personal information, he had opened 7 different credit cards in my name. The total debt he had accumulated through gambling and luxury purchases exceeded $100,000. Marcus showed me receipts from casinos, expensive restaurants, and high-end electronics stores where Trevor had spent money using my stolen credit. "Your brother has been living quite well on your future earnings," Marcus observed grimly. "He even used one of these cards to book a vacation to Las Vegas, where he promptly lost another $15,000 at the poker tables." However, the most devastating discovery was yet to come. William had been forging my signature on legal documents related to my startup company. Using sophisticated copying techniques, he had managed to create convincing replicas of my handwriting on papers that transferred 30% of my business ownership to himself. "Your father has been quite busy," Marcus said, spreading the forged documents across his desk. He created an elaborate backstory about providing initial investment capital for your company, complete with fake promissory notes and loan agreements. According to these papers, you borrowed $200,000 from him to start your business. The forgeries were sophisticated enough to fool a casual observer, but Marcus had brought in a handwriting expert who quickly identified the deception. The expert explained that while William had practiced my signature extensively, there were microscopic differences in pen pressure and letter formation that revealed the fraud. Even more disturbing was the discovery that William had been planning this theft for over a year. Marcus found emails between my father and a competitor company called TechFlow Industries discussing the potential purchase of my business shares. The negotiations had been ongoing for months, with William promising to deliver my ownership stake in exchange for a $5 million payment. Your father has been treating your success like his personal retirement plan, Marcus explained. He never intended to let you keep control of the company you built. The evidence of break-ins at my apartment was equally shocking. Security footage from my building showed my family members entering my unit multiple times over the past month, using keys they had secretly copied. They had been systematically removing valuable items, selling some and keeping others for their personal use. Marcus showed me receipts from pawn shops where they had sold my electronics furniture and jewelry. The total value of stolen items exceeded $60,000. Most heartbreaking was seeing the receipt for my grandmother's antique jewelry set, which had been sold for only $3,000 despite being worth at least 10 times that amount. The good news is that we have overwhelming evidence of multiple felony crimes, Marcus said. Identity theft, fraud, forgery, and theft all carry serious penalties in this state. The bad news is that recovering your stolen assets will take time, and some items like your grandmother's jewelry may be difficult to retrieve. Marcus explained that the complexity of the crimes meant we would need to involve both state and federal authorities. The credit card fraud alone constituted a federal offense, while the business document forgeries violated state corporate law. The total amount stolen exceeded the threshold for felony charges, meaning each family member faced potential prison time. Before we proceed with criminal charges, I want to make sure you understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with. Marcus said seriously, "This isn't just a family dispute over money. Your relatives have committed serious crimes that have caused you substantial financial and emotional harm. Prosecuting them will likely mean lengthy prison sentences." I thought carefully about his words, remembering how they had laughed about my injuries and celebrated my suffering. They had shown me no mercy when I was at my most vulnerable. The decision to pursue justice felt not just justified, but necessary to prevent them from victimizing others in the future. 3 days after my meeting with Marcus, I received an unexpected visitor who would reveal just how far my family's betrayal extended. David Chen, my business partner and closest friend, appeared at my hospital room door looking haggard and deeply concerned. David and I had built our software company together over the past 3 years, and he had been frantically trying to reach me since my accident. "Alexa, thank goodness you're okay," David said, rushing to my bedside. "I've been getting the strangest calls from your family, and none of it made sense until now." What David told me next revealed that my family's scheme went far beyond simple theft. They had been actively trying to steal my entire company while I lay unconscious in the hospital. William had contacted David claiming that I had suffered permanent brain damage and was no longer capable of running our business. "Your father showed up at our office with what looked like official medical documents," David explained. "They stated that you had severe traumatic brain injury with cognitive impairment that would require permanent guardianship. He wanted to discuss immediate buyout options for your shares. The forged medical papers were convincing enough that David had initially believed them. William had presented himself as a grieving father, dealing with his daughter's tragic incapacity. He claimed that doctors had told him I would never be able to work in technology again due to memory loss and processing difficulties. Jessica had played her part in the deception by posing as my designated power of attorney. She arrived at subsequent meetings with legal documents that appeared to authorize her to make business decisions on my behalf. Her performance was so convincing that even David's lawyer had initially accepted the paperwork as legitimate. "Your sister was incredibly persuasive," David admitted. "She knew details about our business operations that only someone close to you would know. She talked about our development timeline, our client contracts, even our internal company culture. I started to think maybe you really had authorized her to represent you." But the family's approach became increasingly aggressive when David hesitated to agree to their demands. Trevor had actually shown up at David's home one evening, making thinly veiled threats about what might happen if he didn't cooperate with their takeover attempt. Trevor claimed that I was never coming back to work and that David needed to accept reality. "Your brother was quite intimidating," David said. "He knew where my kids went to school, where my wife worked, even what kind of car I drove. He made it clear that refusing to work with your family would have consequences." Sandra had taken a different approach, spreading rumors throughout our industry network about my alleged mental breakdown and drug addiction. She contacted several of our major clients, claiming that I was in rehabilitation for substance abuse and would be unable to fulfill our contract obligations. "She was very convincing," David said. "Sandra presented herself as your concerned mother, who was trying to clean up the mess you had supposedly left behind. She had explanations for everything from why you weren't answering your phone to why you hadn't been responding to emails. The most shocking revelation was that William had already scheduled a board meeting to vote me out as CEO of my own company. He had convinced two of our minor investors that I was permanently incapacitated and that new leadership was necessary to protect their investments. The meeting was planned for the following week, giving David very little time to prevent the hostile takeover. "Your father had done his homework," David explained. "He knew exactly how our corporate structure worked and what percentage of votes he would need to remove you from leadership. If I hadn't insisted on waiting to hear from you personally, you would have lost control of your company while you were still in the hospital." Even more disturbing was the discovery that William had been negotiating with TechFlow Industries for months before my accident. David had received calls from TechFlow executives asking about the availability of our proprietary software and whether ownership might be changing hands soon. At the time, David had assumed these were routine acquisition inquiries, but now the timing seemed suspiciously convenient. "TechFlow offered $15 million for your shares specifically," David said. "They weren't interested in the whole company, just your portion of the ownership. That should have been a red flag, but I didn't connect the dots until your father started pushing for a quick sale. The negotiated price was significantly below market value for my stake in the company. Our recent $10 million contract had increased our valuation substantially, making my shares worth closer to $25 million. William was essentially planning to sell my ownership at a 40% discount, keeping the difference as his commission for arranging the deal. Jessica had already begun spending money from the anticipated sale. David had seen her driving a brand new luxury car worth over $80,000. When he asked her about it, she claimed I had bought it as a gift before my accident. She had also booked an expensive vacation to Europe, telling people that she needed time to recover from the stress of dealing with my medical situation. "The whole family seemed to have new expensive things," David observed. "Your mother was wearing jewelry I had never seen before, and Trevor was talking about investing in real estate. It was like they had already received a windfall from somewhere. Most disturbing of all was David's discovery that the family had hired a corrupt attorney named Robert Hayes to fabricate conservatorship papers. Hayes had a history of helping families gain control of elderly relatives' assets through questionable legal means. He specialized in cases where cognitive impairment was difficult to prove definitively. Hayes was very confident that he could get your father appointed as your legal guardian, David said. He claimed to have relationships with certain judges who would approve conservatorship requests without extensive medical evaluation. The whole thing felt wrong from the beginning. David's suspicions had intensified when William tried to bribe hospital staff to declare me mentally incompetent. Nurses reported that my father had approached them with cash offers to modify my medical records or provide false statements about my cognitive abilities. When that failed, he had attempted to convince doctors that I was suicidal and needed to be placed under psychiatric hold. Your father was desperate to establish some kind of legal incapacity, David explained. He needed official documentation that you couldn't make your own decisions in order to complete the business sale. When the medical staff refused to cooperate, he started getting more creative with his approach. The timeline David presented was chilling in its calculated precision. My family had been planning this theft for months, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. My accident had simply accelerated their schedule, giving them the perfect excuse to claim emergency guardianship and business necessity. I recorded some of the conversations with your father, David admitted. I started getting suspicious when his story kept changing, so I began documenting everything. We have him on tape discussing the sale to TechFlow and talking about how you would never know what happened. As David shared these recordings with me, I heard my father's voice planning my financial destruction with casual indifference. He talked about me like I was already dead, discussing how to divide my assets and eliminate any trace of my involvement in the company I had built from nothing. The betrayal was so complete and systematic that I struggled to process the full scope of their deception. These weren't crimes of opportunity or desperation. They were carefully planned attacks on my life's work, executed by people who had pretended to love and support me. Marcus wasted no time in bringing additional expertise to my case once David shared his evidence. He connected me with Sarah Williams, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes and family fraud cases. Sarah was a former FBI agent with 20 years of experience tracking complex criminal enterprises, and her investigation would reveal that my family's crimes extended far beyond what any of us had initially imagined. Your case reminds me of organized crime families I used to investigate, Sarah told me during our first meeting. The level of coordination and planning suggests this isn't their first time running this type of operation. Sarah's background check on my family members revealed a pattern of financial abuse that went back years. William and Sandra had previously been involved in scamming my grandmother Betty out of her life savings before she passed away 3 years earlier. The tactics they used were identical to what they had attempted with me: forged documents, false medical claims, and systematic theft of assets. Your grandmother was their practice run, Sarah explained as she showed me the evidence. They convinced her to sign over power of attorney by claiming she was developing dementia. Then they systematically emptied her bank accounts and sold her property while she was still mentally competent. The investigation revealed that my grandmother had tried to report the theft to authorities before her death, but William and Sandra had convinced police that she was confused due to her age. They provided fake medical records suggesting cognitive decline, and the case was closed without proper investigation. Betty had died knowing her own children had stolen her life savings, but powerless to stop them. Jessica's criminal history was equally troubling. Sarah discovered that she had been fired from her previous job for embezzling money from a nonprofit organization that helped homeless veterans. The amount stolen was over $40,000, which Jessica had used to fund a gambling addiction that the family had successfully hidden from me. "Your sister learned her skills working for that charity," Sarah said. "She figured out how to manipulate accounting systems and forge signatures. The nonprofit chose not to prosecute because they were afraid of bad publicity, so she never faced consequences for that theft." Trevor's background revealed even more disturbing information. His gambling addiction was far worse than any of us had realized, with debts to dangerous people that exceeded $200,000. Sarah found evidence that he had been stealing from former girlfriends, roommates, and employers to fund his addiction and pay off gambling debts. "Your brother has been running credit card scams for at least 5 years, Sarah explained. "He targets people he gets close to, steals their personal information, and then disappears when the fraud is discovered. You're not his first victim, just his most profitable one." Most shocking was the discovery that Trevor owed money to loan sharks who had been threatening violence if he didn't pay up soon. His gambling debts included borrowed money from organized crime figures who were not known for their patience with delinquent borrowers. My success had literally been his salvation from potentially deadly consequences. "Your father has been planning your murder for at least 6 months, Sarah told me with chilling directness. "He researched everything from drug overdoses to car accidents. The stairs incident might have been Trevor acting impulsively, but your father had backup plans if you survived." The evidence included text messages between family members discussing different scenarios for my death. Jessica had suggested making it look like I had committed suicide due to work stress, while Sandra preferred the idea of a drug overdose that could be blamed on prescription pain medication. William had been the most methodical, researching poisons that would be difficult to detect during autopsy. "They were getting desperate," Sarah explained. "Your brother's gambling debts were escalating, and the loan sharks were threatening to hurt the whole family if he didn't pay up soon. Your success made you a target because you represented their only way out of serious trouble." Sarah also uncovered evidence that my family had been monitoring my activities for months before the attack. They had installed tracking software on my phone and computer, giving them access to my emails, financial accounts, and business communications. This explained how they knew so much about my contract negotiations and company operations. "Your father had been reading your private emails for at least 8 months, Sarah said. "He knew about the $10 million contract before you did. He also knew about your other business opportunities and investment accounts. They had complete access to your financial life." The tracking software had allowed them to plan their theft with precision timing. They knew when I would be away from my apartment when I received large payments, and when I was most vulnerable to their schemes. The software also included keylogging capabilities, giving them access to all my passwords and login credentials. Even more disturbing was Sarah's discovery that my family had been networking with other criminals to expand their operations. William had been in contact with identity theft rings that specialized in stealing from successful young professionals. Sandra had been sharing techniques with other family fraud specialists, essentially operating a criminal consulting service. "Your family wasn't just stealing from you," Sarah explained. "They were part of a larger network of criminals who target successful family members for financial exploitation. They had been sharing your information with other criminal groups, potentially setting you up for additional attacks." The investigation revealed that they had already identified their next targets, David's family and several of my business associates. William had been gathering personal information about people in my professional network, planning to use my trusted relationships to gain access to additional victims. "They were going to use your reputation and connections to steal from everyone you know," Sarah said. Your success was just the beginning of their criminal enterprise. They saw you as a gateway to much larger theft opportunities. Sarah's final discovery was perhaps the most chilling of all. My family had been in contact with professional criminals who specialized in making murders look like accidents. William had been quoted a price of $50,000 to have me killed in a way that would appear to be a random crime or tragic accident. Your father was serious about killing you, Sarah told me with conviction. He had moved beyond planning and was actively seeking people who could help him carry out murder. The only thing that stopped him was Trevor's impulsive action with the stairs. Ironically, your brother's lack of patience might have saved your life by putting you in the hospital where you were protected. The evidence Sarah had gathered painted a picture of a family that had transformed into a criminal enterprise with me as their primary target. They had systematically planned to steal everything I owned and then eliminate me to avoid consequences. The betrayal was so complete that it challenged my basic understanding of human nature and family relationships. Marcus coordinated with both state and federal law enforcement to develop a comprehensive strategy for bringing my family to justice. The complexity of their crimes required cooperation between multiple agencies, including the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and the State Attorney General's office. But Marcus proposed something that initially seemed impossible, using my family's greed and arrogance against them in an elaborate sting operation. Your family believes you're helpless and defeated, Marcus explained during a strategy meeting with the investigators. We can use that assumption to catch them in the act of celebrating their success and planning their next moves. The plan was audacious and risky. Working with hospital administration, we would spread rumors that I had died from complications following my surgery. The story would be that my injuries had been more severe than initially diagnosed, and that I had passed away quietly during a routine medical procedure. Hospital staff would corroborate this story if contacted by my family members. Sarah would monitor my family's communications and movements to document their reactions to news of my supposed death. We expected them to reveal additional crimes, and perhaps even admit to their attempts to harm me. Hidden recording devices would capture their conversations during what they believed would be private celebrations. People often confess to crimes when they think the victim is dead and can never testify against them, Sarah explained. Your family's arrogance suggests they won't be able to resist bragging about how clever they've been. The operation required extensive coordination with federal prosecutors, who would use the recorded evidence to build an ironclad case against each family member. Any admissions of guilt or descriptions of criminal activity captured during the surveillance would be admissible in court as long as proper legal procedures were followed. We also arranged for additional victims of my family's crimes to come forward during the investigation. Sarah had located several people who had been financially harmed by William, Sandra, Jessica, and Trevor over the years, but who had been afraid to report the crimes. Knowing that a serious investigation was underway gave these victims courage to seek justice. The plan was set in motion on a Tuesday morning when hospital staff began quietly spreading word that I had not survived the night. My supposed death was attributed to an unexpected blood clot that had caused complications during routine surgery. The story was believable because my injuries were indeed severe, and such complications were not uncommon in similar cases. Sarah positioned surveillance teams at locations where my family was likely to gather once they heard the news. Hidden cameras and recording equipment were set up at their favorite restaurant, William's House, and several other places where they might celebrate privately. Federal agents coordinated to ensure comprehensive coverage of their activities. The family's reaction to my supposed death exceeded even our most cynical expectations. Within hours of receiving the news, William had made reservations at the most expensive restaurant in town for a celebration dinner. Sandra went shopping for a new dress, telling the sales clerk that she was celebrating the resolution of a difficult family situation. Jessica's response was perhaps the most disturbing. She immediately contacted a luxury car dealership to upgrade her vehicle, explaining to the salesperson that she had just received a large inheritance. Trevor began calling his gambling contacts to arrange high-stakes poker games, apparently confident that his debt problems were about to be solved. The surveillance teams captured incredibly damaging footage of the family's celebration dinner that evening. They toasted to my death with expensive champagne, joking about how much money they were going to inherit. Sandra actually said that my death was the best thing that had ever happened to their family. "Finally, we can live the way we deserve," Jessica was recorded saying. "No more pretending to care about her stupid business or listening to her act superior all the time." William's recorded comments were even more incriminating. He bragged about how perfectly their plan had worked, from Trevor pushing me down the stairs to their systematic theft of my assets. He described in detail how they had forged documents, stolen my identity, and manipulated my business relationships. "That $10 million contract was just the beginning," William said during the dinner. "Once we sell her company shares to TechFlow, we'll have enough money to retire comfortably and maybe expand our operations to target some of her business associates." Trevor provided the most shocking confession of all. He admitted that pushing me down the stairs had been intentional, not an impulsive act of anger. He revealed that the family had been planning to hurt me physically if their financial theft hadn't been sufficient to gain control of my assets. I was supposed to make it look like an accident. Trevor said, clearly intoxicated by both alcohol and his perceived success. "Dad wanted me to push her down the stairs and claim she had slipped on something. If that hadn't worked, we had other plans to make sure she couldn't interfere with our business." Sandra's recorded comments revealed that they had already contacted TechFlow Industries to finalize the sale of my company shares. The deal was scheduled to close within the week, with the family planning to split $20 million between themselves. Sandra had even calculated how much each person would receive after paying off Trevor's gambling debts. But perhaps most devastating was William's admission that they had been planning to kill me if the stairs incident hadn't been fatal. He described researching poisons and hiring professional criminals to ensure my permanent removal from their lives. He expressed regret that Trevor's impulsiveness had forced them to accelerate their timeline, but satisfaction that the end result was the same. "We were going to poison her slowly so it would look like a medical condition," William explained to his family. "But this way worked out even better because everyone will remember her as the successful businesswoman who died tragically young, not as someone who was murdered by her own family." The recordings captured over 3 hours of detailed confessions to multiple felony crimes. The family discussed not only their attacks on me, but also their previous thefts from my grandmother Jessica's embezzlement from her former employer and Trevor's extensive credit card fraud operations. They had provided federal prosecutors with enough evidence to pursue decades of prison time for each family member. As the evening progressed, the family became increasingly comfortable discussing their future criminal plans. William talked about using my professional network to identify wealthy targets for future theft operations. Sandra described techniques for manipulating elderly relatives to gain access to their assets. Jessica shared strategies for embezzling from employers without detection. "This is just the beginning," William declared as they prepared to leave the restaurant. "We've proven that we can handle complex operations like this. There are plenty of other successful people out there who trust their families too much for their own good." The final part of the sting operation occurred the next morning when federal agents arrested all 4 family members simultaneously at their respective homes. The arrests were coordinated to prevent any family member from warning the others or destroying evidence. Each person was taken into custody while still believing that I was dead and that their crimes would never be discovered. The moment of revelation came during their arraignment when I appeared in the courtroom very much alive. The family's reaction was captured on court cameras and would later become evidence of their genuine belief in my death. William screamed and actually fainted when he saw me. Sandra began hyperventilating and had to be given medical attention. Jessica started crying and immediately began begging for forgiveness. Trevor attempted to run from the courtroom but was restrained by court security. "This is impossible," William kept repeating as he was helped back to his feet. "You're supposed to be dead. We planned everything perfectly." His words provided the final confirmation that their crimes had been premeditated and systematic rather than impulsive acts of desperation. The federal prosecutor would later use William's courtroom outburst as additional evidence of the family's criminal intent and their belief that murder was an acceptable solution to their financial problems. The courtroom was packed with victims, legal professionals, and media representatives as my family's trial began. Federal prosecutor Amanda Richardson had built what she described as one of the most comprehensive family fraud cases in recent memory. The evidence was so overwhelming that each defendant's attorney had privately suggested plea bargaining, but the family had insisted on fighting the charges in court. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Richardson began, "you are about to hear testimony about a criminal enterprise that operated under the guise of family relationships. The defendants didn't just steal money or forge documents. They planned and attempted to commit murder for financial gain, targeting their own daughter and sister." The prosecution's first witness was my Uncle Frank, my father's brother, who testified about losing his retirement savings to William's investment scam 3 years earlier. Frank explained how William had approached him with what seemed like a legitimate real estate investment opportunity, complete with professional-looking documents and references from fake investors. "My brother convinced me to invest my entire retirement account," Frank testified with visible emotion. "He showed me contracts and financial projections that made it look like a sure thing. I trusted him because he was family, and I ended up losing $300,000 that I had saved over 30 years of working." Frank's testimony revealed that William had used sophisticated techniques to make his scam appear legitimate. He had created fake companies, forged legal documents, and even hired actors to pose as successful investors during presentation meetings. The scam had been so convincing that Frank's own financial advisor had initially recommended the investment. When I realized I had been cheated and confronted William, he told me that I was too old and stupid to understand modern business, Frank said. He claimed that my losses were my own fault for not reading the fine print carefully enough. The next witness was Patricia Chen, a former neighbor who had fallen victim to Sandra's identity theft operation. Patricia explained how Sandra had gained access to her personal information by volunteering to help with her mother's care during a medical emergency. Sandra had used her position of trust to steal Patricia's social security number and other identifying information. "Sandra seemed so caring and helpful when my mother was sick," Patricia testified. "She offered to handle insurance paperwork and medical billing while I was at work. I never imagined she was copying my personal information to steal my identity." Sandra had used Patricia's identity to open multiple credit accounts and make purchases totaling over $60,000. The theft had destroyed Patricia's credit rating and taken years to resolve, during which time she was unable to get loans or even rent an apartment in her own name. Jessica's former employer nonprofit director, Michael Barnes, provided devastating testimony about her embezzlement from the Veterans Assistance charity where she had worked. Michael explained how Jessica had systematically stolen money intended to help homeless veterans using her position as financial coordinator to divert funds to her personal accounts. Jessica stole money that was supposed to provide food and shelter for veterans who had served our country, Michael testified. She looked me in the eye every day knowing that she was taking resources away from people who desperately needed help. The embezzlement had forced the charity to reduce its services significantly, meaning fewer veterans received assistance during the period when Jessica was stealing from them. Michael estimated that her theft had directly impacted the lives of over 200 veterans who had been denied services due to lack of funds. Trevor's college roommate James Wilson testified about losing his inheritance money to Trevor's gambling addiction and credit card fraud. James explained how Trevor had stolen his personal information during their freshman year and used it to fund increasingly desperate gambling binges. "I trusted Trevor with everything," James said. "We were best friends, and I told him about my grandmother leaving me money for college. I never thought he would steal from me, but he took every penny and left me with massive debt that I'm still paying off 10 years later." James's testimony revealed the psychological impact of Trevor's betrayal, describing how the theft had forced him to drop out of college and work multiple jobs to pay off debts he hadn't created. The experience had left him with trust issues that affected his relationships and career prospects for years. The prosecution then presented testimony from forensic accountants who had analyzed the full scope of my family's criminal enterprise. Lead forensic accountant Dr. Helen Foster explained that the family had stolen over $2 million from various victims over a 10-year period, making their operation one of the largest family fraud cases in state history. The defendants operated like a sophisticated criminal organization, Dr. Foster testified. They had specific roles, shared techniques, and coordinated their activities to maximize theft while minimizing detection. This wasn't random crime. It was systematic exploitation of trust relationships. Dr. Foster's analysis showed that the family had refined their techniques over time, learning from each successful theft to improve their methods for future victims. They had developed template documents for forging signatures, established relationships with corrupt professionals who would provide fake documentation, and created networks for selling stolen goods. FBI agent Rebecca Martinez took the stand to describe the federal investigation into my family's crimes. Agent Martinez explained how the family's theft had crossed state lines and involved federal agencies making their crimes subject to enhanced penalties under federal racketeering laws. The defendants weren't just stealing from individual victims, Agent Martinez testified. They were operating a criminal enterprise that involved mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Their organization met all the criteria for prosecution under federal organized crime statutes. Agent Martinez presented evidence showing that my family had been in contact with other criminal groups, sharing techniques and potentially planning coordinated attacks on multiple victims. The investigation had uncovered connections to at least 3 other family fraud operations in different states, suggesting a broader criminal network. The prosecution's most powerful evidence came from the recordings made during the sting operation. The jury listened to hours of audio and video footage showing my family celebrating my supposed death and confessing to their crimes in explicit detail. The recordings captured not only admissions of past crimes, but also detailed plans for future criminal activities. When William's voice filled the courtroom bragging about how perfectly their plan had worked, several jury members visibly reacted with shock and disgust. His casual discussion of planning my murder was particularly damaging, showing a level of callousness that went beyond typical financial crimes. We have the defendants in their own words describing premeditated murder, systematic theft, and plans for future crimes, Prosecutor Richardson told the jury during her closing argument. They didn't just steal money. They stole trust, security, and peace of mind from people who loved them. The defense attorneys struggled to counter such overwhelming evidence. William's lawyer argued that his client had been driven to desperation by financial pressure, but the prosecution's evidence showed years of careful planning that contradicted any claim of impulsive behavior. Sandra's attorney claimed she had been manipulated by her husband, but recordings showed her taking initiative in planning and executing thefts. Jessica's defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of family pressure, but testimony from her former employer showed that she had been stealing before becoming involved in the family operation. Trevor's lawyer argued addiction had impaired his judgment, but evidence showed he had been stealing from people long before developing gambling problems. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Sandra crying. All 4 defendants were found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, identity theft, and numerous other charges. The convictions carried mandatory minimum sentences that would ensure each family member spent decades in prison. William received 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 20 years. Sandra was sentenced to 25 years with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Jessica received 15 years with possible parole after 8 years. Trevor was sentenced to 12 years with parole eligibility after 6 years, along with mandatory restitution payments to all victims. Judge Margaret Foster addressed the defendants directly during sentencing, expressing her shock at the calculated nature of their crimes. You targeted people who trusted you most, exploiting family relationships for financial gain. Most disturbing is the evidence showing you planned to commit murder to cover up your thefts. These crimes strike at the foundation of family trust and human decency. The judge also ordered complete financial restitution to all victims, seizure of all family assets obtained through criminal activity, and permanent restraining orders preventing contact with any victims. The family would lose their house cars and all personal property purchased with stolen money. As the defendants were led away in handcuffs, William looked back at me with an expression of pure hatred. His final words before being removed from the courtroom were a threat that federal prosecutors would later use to argue for enhanced security measures during his incarceration. "This isn't over," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Family is forever, and I'll find a way to make you pay for betraying us." His threat only served to reinforce the judge's decision to impose maximum sentences and strict conditions for any eventual parole hearings. The family that had once been my support system was now a criminal organization facing decades behind bars, with their victims finally receiving the justice they deserved. 6 months after the trial concluded, I stood in my new office overlooking San Francisco Bay, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. My company had not only survived my family's attacks, but had thrived beyond anything I had previously imagined. The $10 million contract that had triggered their murderous jealousy had led to international expansion opportunities worth over $50 million. David and I had restructured our business to include additional security measures and background checks for anyone with access to sensitive information. We had learned valuable lessons about protecting ourselves and our company from both external threats and internal betrayal. Our experience had made us stronger and more cautious, but not cynical about human nature. The recovery of my stolen assets had taken months of legal work, but Marcus had successfully retrieved most of what my family had taken. Bank accounts frozen during the investigation were returned to me with interest. Items sold to pawn shops were tracked down and repurchased when possible. Even some of my grandmother's jewelry was recovered, though several pieces had been sold to private collectors and were lost forever. More importantly, I had used my experience to create something meaningful that would help other victims of family financial abuse. The Alexa Foundation for Family Fraud Prevention had become a nationwide resource for people experiencing similar betrayals. We provided legal assistance, financial recovery services, and emotional support for victims who had been exploited by their own relatives. Marcus had become the foundation's legal director, working full-time to help families navigate the complex process of prosecuting financial crimes committed by relatives. His experience with my case had taught him specialized techniques for handling family fraud cases, and he had successfully prosecuted dozens of similar crimes over the past 6 months. Sarah Williams had joined the foundation as our security director, using her investigative skills to help victims gather evidence and build cases against their abusers. She had developed training programs for law enforcement agencies, teaching them to recognize signs of family financial abuse and handle these sensitive cases with appropriate care. Helen Martinez, the hospital social worker who had first connected me with legal help, had become a board member of our foundation. She helped us develop protocols for medical professionals to identify and respond to family abuse situations. Her work ensured that other patients wouldn't be abandoned by their families during medical emergencies without someone advocating for their rights. Dr. Foster, the forensic accountant who had analyzed my family's crimes, had created educational programs to help people protect themselves from financial exploitation. Her workshops taught people how to secure their accounts, recognize warning signs of identity theft, and establish safeguards against family members who might attempt to steal their assets. The foundation's work had already helped recover over $3 million in stolen assets for victims across the country. We had assisted with the prosecution of 47 family fraud cases, resulting in convictions that totaled over 200 years of combined prison sentences for the perpetrators. But perhaps most meaningful was the emotional support we provided to people who felt isolated and betrayed by their family's crimes. Many victims blamed themselves for trusting their relatives or felt ashamed about being exploited by people they loved. Our support groups helped them understand that they were not responsible for their family's choices and that healing was possible. I had learned that my grandmother Betty had left me more than just jewelry in her will. She had written letters describing her own experience with William and Sandra's theft, documenting their crimes in detail, and expressing her hope that someday justice would be served. Her courage in recording the truth had provided additional evidence for our case and inspiration for my foundation's work. "Your grandmother knew what they were capable of," Marcus had told me when we discovered her letters. She wanted to make sure that if they ever targeted someone else, there would be evidence to stop them. Betty's letters had also contained advice about forgiveness and moving forward after betrayal. She wrote about learning to build new family relationships with people who genuinely cared about her well-being rather than her assets. Her wisdom had guided me through the difficult process of accepting that my biological family was not capable of healthy relationships. I had found my real family among the people who supported me during my darkest moments. David had proven himself to be more loyal than any brother could be. Marcus had shown more protective concern than my father ever had. Sarah had demonstrated the kind of fierce advocacy that I had always wished for from my mother. Helen had provided the nurturing care that my sister had never offered. These relationships were built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values rather than genetic connections or legal obligations. They had chosen to be part of my life not because they were required to do so, but because they wanted to contribute to my happiness and success. My company had grown to employ over 100 people, each of whom had been carefully screened and chosen for their integrity as well as their technical skills. We had created a workplace culture based on trust, collaboration, and shared success. Our employees knew that their contributions were valued and that their personal growth was as important as our business objectives. The international contracts we had signed would allow us to expand our software solutions to markets in Europe and Asia, potentially helping millions of people access better technology services. Our success was no longer just about my personal achievement, but about creating opportunities for others and contributing positively to our industry. I had also reconnected with extended family members who had been kept away by William's manipulations over the years. Cousins, aunts, and uncles reached out after learning about the trial, sharing their own stories of being excluded from family gatherings or warned away from maintaining relationships with me. "Your father told us you had become arrogant and didn't want anything to do with the rest of the family," my cousin Laura explained during our reunion. "We believed him because he was so convincing, and we didn't want to intrude if you really wanted to be left alone." These reconnections had helped me understand that my family's isolation tactics had been part of their long-term strategy to eliminate witnesses who might notice their criminal behavior. By keeping me separated from other relatives who cared about me, they had reduced the likelihood that anyone would question their version of events or offer alternative support. The legal precedent established by my family's prosecution had already helped other victims pursue justice in similar cases. Prosecutors in multiple states had referenced our case when arguing for enhanced penalties in family fraud situations. The recorded evidence techniques we had used had become a model for other investigations. Your courage in pursuing this case has helped change how the justice system handles family financial crimes, Amanda Richardson had told me after the sentencing. Many victims are afraid to prosecute their relatives, but your example shows that justice is possible and necessary. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that my family's betrayal had ultimately led me to discover my true strength and purpose. Their attempts to destroy me had instead revealed my capacity for resilience, my ability to build meaningful relationships, and my commitment to helping others who faced similar challenges. The physical scars from my fall had healed completely, but the emotional growth from surviving their attacks had changed me in positive ways that I would carry forever. I had learned to trust my instincts, value my accomplishments, and surround myself with people who celebrated rather than resented my success. My grandmother's final letter had contained a prediction that had proven remarkably accurate. "Alexa, if you're reading this, it means that William and Sandra's crimes have finally been exposed. I want you to know that their betrayal is not a reflection of your worth or your ability to build loving relationships. You have the strength to overcome their damage and create a better life than they ever could have given you." Betty had been right about everything. The family that had tried to destroy me was now imprisoned and powerless to cause further harm. The life I had built in spite of their attacks was richer and more meaningful than anything they could have provided. The people who surrounded me now were the family I deserved, chosen through mutual love and respect, rather than accident of birth. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted completely, and how did you find the strength to rebuild your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's biggest challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in justice, healing, and the power of human resilience. Remember that your true family consists of people who celebrate your successes and support you through difficulties, not those who exploit your trust for their own gain. May you always have the courage to seek justice when you've been wronged, and the wisdom to build relationships based on genuine love and mutual respect.